Hey everybody, welcome to the Oregon State University Permaculture Design Pro class. This is the spring summer class. This is our third office hour. We've got a couple of questions today and a few announcements. And yeah, we'll jump right into it. So right off the bat, we've got some potential events coming up that folks might be interested in. This Thursday, we've got a webinar with colleague and friend of mine, Mark Krawcheck. He works in what's called Coppice Agroforestry, which is using trees that when you cut either at a high mark or a low mark, high mark's called pollarding, low mark is called coppicing, they grow back. And so this was a very common way of producing timber of certain diameters and sizes before we got to dimensional lumber. So if folks are interested, it is a free webinar on Thursday, so folks can check that out. Also, for folks that stay to the end, we're going to be giving away 3 spots to Mark's Coppice Agroforestry self-paced course. And then the second is a good colleague and friend of mine, Joe Tobias, who studied with Elaine Ingham and has been a soil food web tester and microscopist, is going to be offering the art and science of cultivating living soils in the fall with regenerative living. So this is a great way to jump into understanding soil from a microbial perspective. And if you've ever wanted to build amazing compost and be walked through step by step, this is really the course. So both of those are in the question and answer document underneath May 6th. And so we're going to start off here with a couple of questions. First is from Winad. Do you have any tips or best method for surveying viable pond sites? Yeah, so I want to start there, but I want to kind of bring out the conversation a little bit and kind of start with first principles about water. So open to the group, what do we know about water? Where we find water, we find what?
Life?
That's right. Where we find water, we find life. Exactly. So when we start to find areas that are on a landscape that have either riparian vegetation, things like grasses, sedges, or plants that we know love water, or if we just see a place that's sort of like a fertile crescent or crotch within topography, those are places that we would want to investigate. Similarly, if we were out walking a landscape and we were in a place or space and we started to feel or smell humidity, that would be another place that we would want to investigate. The reason why I start there is that we can always have maps and we can always work from maps, but maps are never the territory. And so unless we actually go into a landscape and look at that landscape, it'll be very difficult to understand where a map, or pardon me, where a place for water might be. So the first thing we want to take a look at is walking a landscape and seeing where we go in places, usually valleys, where we go from convex to concave. And that means we go from a steep angle to a more shallow angle. And what this means is that when a drop of water hits the ground, it is a violent percussion. And we don't think of it that way because we don't think of microscopic elements or even microscopic elements that we can see with the naked eye, but they're quite a bit smaller. When that raindrop hits sand, silt, and clay, it hits a soil bed, which is what we call a molecule of soil that we can see. It breaks apart the sand, silt, and clay. When all that rain hits, it starts to come into solution. And when that solution gets enough to resist gravity, it starts to move in sheet flow. Then it moves in rills and runnels. And then it starts to get in rivulets. And now we start to get actual flow. And once we get that flow moving, it'll go over those convex areas, get to those concave. The water will slow. And what happens? What happens to the sand, silt, and clay when the water slows?
Liquid separation.
That's right. So it's separated already in water, but when it slows, they drop. So sand drops first, then silt, then clay. So the reason why those convex to concave areas are so important is because over the millennia of rain happening and over the millennia of floods and over the millennia of storms, basically you have this pattern that's been going on for thousands, millions of years where precipitation hits that ground, breaks up soil bed, moves it through by taking sand, silt, and clay in solution, going over convex landforms, and then going into concave forms, slowing down and then dropping out sand, silt, and clay. That means in those places, we call them inflection points, or just after the inflection points in a landscape, chances are we're going to find clay. Now, when we're talking about ponds, I want to just kind of pull the lens back a bit. First, we need to talk about water bodies. So water bodies are any type of earthwork that can hold water either temporarily or perennially. So either this is a water body, an indentation, as Jessica said, where there's water, there's life. There's this indentation where if we have some transit time of water where water can fill up an indentation and then saturate in, chances are we're going to find some kind of life there. And there may be value in developing water bodies that are ephemeral ponds or pools or check dams or weirs, all of these many different types of water bodies, all the way up to and including a lined pond or a pond that is in a very slow leak. All ponds leak. It's just a matter of time. Doesn't matter if you use concrete, doesn't matter if you use an EPDM liner, doesn't matter if you use clay. They all have a certain amount of leak. This is really important because I think a lot of people have this idea that we make a pond, it holds water forever. There's always going to be a recharge conversation. Where we place those ponds is important for two major aspects. One is, do we find material there that we can line the pond with? So can we find clay usually at a 40 to 60% minimum level? And can we find a layer of clay within that area that we can then key the dam into? Because if we have this layer of clay and we put in a dam wall, now we have a surface area that actually can hold back the water. We find clay in an area, but we don't find the ability to have a place to key into. Say the clay we're looking for is the first 4 feet. And then after that, we don't find anything that is clay, it's more porous material, then we don't have a place to actually put in that water. The second reason why we look for places that have vegetation and look like there's a lot of vegetations is we may be finding some kind of seep or some kind of artisanal well. Now, those types of springs and wells, they can be the force that actually floods into and fills up a water body. So you can think of it this way: if we come upon a landscape, and there's a couple of spots I think when not in your base map that I can remember that I'd be curious about checking out, and we talked about during the base map clinic. But there's a couple of spots there where it's kind of surprising to see vegetation there. And I'd be curious to dig down to take what's called a test slice, which is basically you're taking an excavator backhoe, and you're basically taking that excavator arm and you're going as far down as the arm will go. And every time that excavator brings out a bucket, you want to test and get a sense by writing it down by saying, okay, that bucket went down, 2.5 feet, it went down almost a meter, and generally going through the ribbon test, which you'll get to in module 5, week 5, you can then test to see what the material is like. We also do what's called a shake jar test. Problem with shake jar test is that they take a long time to settle out. I don't usually carry a glass jar in the field. And the size and the shape of that glass jar can make it difficult to calculate volumes. And then the last thing is that with some types of clays, some types of dispersive clays, the clays actually won't settle out for sometimes months, as opposed to the like 24 hours or a week that normally most soils will settle out in. So basically you're there, you're taking your test slice, you're pulling out that material, you're putting it to the side, you're writing, okay, at 2.5 feet, this is what the soil texture is at, and because it's usually the same bucket over and over, at 2.5 feet, at 5 feet, at 7.5 feet, all the way down, you're basically creating your schism so that way you can see what's down there. Sometimes if you're in the right area, you're going to hit some of those artisanal springs, and that gives you an opportunity to potentially use that water in some way, shape, or form. Artisanal springs are usually created when water finds impermeable layers within the landscape, and they actually push up through hydraulic pressure into a substrata or even all the way to the top of the landscape. They can also happen because the water table is so high, it's pushing through a certain type of material and coming right to the surface. So first off, we're going to take a look for where there's vegetation. We're going to take a look for where there's convex and concave, where we see those changes in the landscape. And then from there, we're going to start to dig into, if we're going towards an earthen lined pond, we're going to dig into with an excavator. Now, on the opposite side of it, if we're not seeking out areas that have water flow that comes into them. We're just looking for places to hold water that we bring water to. And this is like the Practical Permaculture Institute of Kenya that I helped design and build in Busia country. Just going to bring it up here. We needed to bring water into the site, and the site itself didn't have the same amount of precipitable value that it could hold on to fill some of these water volumes. So like in a lot of places in Africa, most of the roads have rutted down to the point to where we have two continuous streams of water that may have a water catchment of 150 square meters to 10 square kilometers. Sometimes those roads can gather a lot of water that's coming in. So with that water, what we did is we built a bund, we built a big speed bump, and then basically directed that water into the half-acre property we were designing. Now, when we bring water in this way, especially in places like with Kenya that has a lot of bare earth, that has a high iron, high calcium soil, has a high quartz soil, we want to drop out that sediment. So same thing with that convex to concave conversation. When raindrops hits the soil bed, breaks it into sand, silt, and clay, puts it into solution, and when it slows, it drops out. We wanted to create a sediment trap. So at the very beginning of this project, we created this little sediment trap that basically that sediment would drop out and then the water would flow up and over kind of a shallow wall and go into the pond. Now, in this situation, when I arrived in Kenya, they'd been doing projects for a number of years, and there was a major failing in those projects. The major failing was they were making ponds for tilapia rearing, but the ponds were being lined first with EPDM liner, which is high density polyethylene. You want to be careful in North America if you're listening to this. It hasn't made its way out into Africa and Asia yet, but in a lot of places in North America, EPDM liner comes with a fire retardant that is built into the plastic, which if you put into a pond will kill all the life in a pond. So if you are using EPDM liner, you want to do it without a fire retardant. But two issues they had in Africa, in Kenya, when we were doing it, is they were creating these ponds that were a single level, so they weren't multi-tiered, and they were using with EPDM liner, and all that water that was coming in had a lot of silt in it. So eventually they'd have to clean out the silt. How did they clean out the silt? With shovels. What happened when they cleaned out the silt in an EPDM lined pond with a shovel? They punctured the liner. And when you puncture a liner with EPDM, very hard to fix. So I suggested we move to what's called ferro cement. Ferro cement is a way of lining ponds and creating water tanks where you take your pond design, and generally you want to create your pond design with layers. And the reason for that is if you have a pond with a single depth, it becomes an evaporation pool. That means the whole water body increases its temperature at the same time and evaporates at the same time. So generally what would happen, two things would happen to the tilapia. Either they would be over-silted and die out due to filtration issues with their gills, or they would heat up during the height of summer and they would die because basically they couldn't live in that pond environment. How we correct for this is we create lots and lots and lots of edge. So lots of stories or steps or terraces within the pond. The reason for this is that center column will become cooler than the upper layers, and you'll get a little bit of convection. So hot air, hot water rises, cool water drops off. And so you have this little mini convection that can happen in a pond. So that's why it's really important to have a deep area of a pond and then have shallow areas. Not to mention it's good for planting. It's good for wildlife to be able to come into and out of the pond, especially if you're trying to dissuade things like mosquito larvae. You want to have a nice ramp so that way you can have things like amphibians and reptiles. You can have dragonfly larvae, but those types of larvae won't nest and develop if it's just a direct cutoff. So it's nice to have a shallow bank on one side of a pond. So anyways, with ferro cement, ferro concrete, what you're doing is you're digging your pond structure, you're putting down a base of gravel, and then you're putting in some kind of wire or chicken wire or some kind of a stucco wire at the base. And that basically creates a base for the material. And then you're taking chicken wire or small gauge wire and you're running it up the entire length of the pond. You're pinning it in. Either you can make pins or you can buy irrigation pins. And then you're using concrete, and then you're using an additive like a Zypex, or you're creaming the concrete if you're in places that don't have that additive. And when you cream, it's basically you create your layers where you have a layer of concrete, and then you do another layer that has a little bit more water that basically can, as you work it, it'll pull up all the fine particles to the top. So that way when it hardens with a lot less pores. And so this is what we did in Kenya to create the pond systems there. That was 13 years ago, and the ponds are still working today. This is what this pond, this was the second big pond. The conversation about the terraces and the tiers didn't exactly translate, and I was off site while the gents were building it. But the first pond actually turned out pretty well. So we're just going to bring everybody down to take a look at this. So what happened is the water came down the road. This was the bund. The water came into pond 1, then moved down back and forth through a number of different banana circles and tree guilds, came into pond 2, which was backup water for a tree nursery that had a borehole. And then it moved down again to pond 3, which was that pond I showed you before. So this is another way to develop pond structure when you cannot create an earthen pond. And then that silt trap was here in the very front. And I just want to make sure we answer all the questions today. So Winod, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a pause, and I'm going to ask for any questions. And then if we've got a bit of time afterwards, I'm going to pull up the Practical Permaculture Institute of Kenya slideshow, and I'll show you the process of how they were all built and designed. But that's basically it in a nutshell. Look for vegetation. Look for places that go from convex to concave. When you have a sense of that place, if you have the ability to bring in a machine, bring in an excavator armed backhoe, they tend to be the most versatile. Bring it in, go down to depth as you're bringing out material, write down what everything is by doing the soil texture field test, which you'll learn in week 5. Or you can look ahead if you want to do it early. And then if you have enough,
it's fine.
Sorry, go ahead.
I know it. It's fine.
You know,
the taste.
Oh, perfect. Great. Awesome.
Yeah.
And then
So
if you have
it's-
enough clay at a 50 to 60% level, then you know you can actually build the pond. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, 100%. It does. It helps a lot. Thanks.
Yeah, you're
Appreciate
most
it.
You're most welcome. Yeah, pleasure. Okay. Great. Okay. And then the second question we had here was, I just want to make sure I understand the peer review part of the assignment. I'm looking to other projects, commenting and support and suggestions I see, at least 2 different sites for every assignment, every week. And then there's a separate thing to submit saying I participated with peer review. Yep, that's exactly it. I don't know if that was you as well, Winod, but yeah, whoever put that in there, that's correct. Oh, Jessica, okay. Yeah, just a reminder for everybody when you ask questions to put in your full name and your portfolio link. Awesome. All right. Any other questions that are alive and kicking for anybody as they're going through the material? Anything under the sun?
I have a question since we're kind of on ponds.
Sure.
I had it in my mind that I want to put a pond on my property, but it doesn't fit any of those qualifications you mentioned. I don't think it's like a textbook good spot for a pond. My house is on the highest part of my property. And so this pad was basically created. It was excavated into place. And so there's no silt, anything like that, but there is a low spot and it does drain from the hill behind it. Are there any drawbacks to choosing a spot for a pond that's not a natural spot? Like, is water always a net positive, I guess?
Yeah, generally speaking, water's always a net positive.
Okay.
Yeah, so we didn't get into all the different types of dams. There's things like turkey nests, contour dams, ridge dams, valley dams. We get into it in week 5, but there's a number of different dams and a number of different types. Winod's question was really about how do you go seeking the best spots? So if you're in a place where, okay, I can't put that pond there, I'm going to put it in maybe an undesirable, but it's the only place left I have, then yeah, 100%. It's really about just doing where you can, what you can. The one thing I would say is just be conscientious about placement of ponds, especially in a homesteading setting. I like to place ponds if I can near the house, only because, especially in the leeward wind, because that wind during a summer can actually really cool a house. And as we take a look at all the warming that's going on, I don't know if anybody's watching, but Asia and Southeast Asia and India in particular are going through a heat wave like they've never experienced before. Canada's experienced heat domes over the last 3 years. We're seeing more and more heat, and we're going to. It's a matter of life that everyone needs to realize is no longer a crisis. It is a reality we all need to adapt to, and we should have adapted to it 10 years ago. So if you can place it in such a way so that way it serves multiple functions within that landscape, so it can help to cool the house, it maybe can provide some bounce light in the winter. So sometimes it lines up well that the summer winds is the same as the bounce light in the winter. So that way you get a little bit more light into the house. There's all these sort of smaller factors to think about, but 100% you can place a pond wherever you like, as long as you have the ability to either realize it's going to be an ephemeral water body. It'll fill up and drain out and fill up and drain out, which are excellent. I think most people here have watched one or two of Andrew's videos. He's done a great job of documenting the value of that type of work, especially in arid and dry climates. Just having a little indentation, just making a landscape rough and loose, right? Just making little indentations can help to increase the amount of water that's held. And then either the genetic seed bank in the soil can be expressed, or you can introduce seed. So yeah, you can absolutely put it in the spot that makes most sense.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great question. Any others? Anything under the sun? And I know sometimes people feel that they shouldn't ask questions about business or development. That's totally fine by me as well. I've specialized in it for over 15 years, helping folks develop, design, and pivot 65 businesses this far. So, if we ever get there as well, feel free to ask away. All right, I'm gonna pull up the PPIK presentation, one of the PPIK presentations. I've made many of these presentations, and truth be told, I don't know where they all are at this point. So this is one of them. So it'll be kind of fun to jump through a project with everybody. All right, can we all see that? Yeah, head nods, thumb nods. Sounds good. Rock on. Okay, just gonna bring it over here so I can look at the same screen. So we talked and have spoken a little bit in the course about this idea of the permaculture, or the scale of permanence for all things agricultural, created by P.A. Yeomans. So PA created this incredible way of looking at a landscape by focusing on the things that took more effort for change and were more permanent first, things like climate, and allowing them to dictate a lot of the design that came below it. The origins of this particular chart was created by Owen Hablutzel, who has done incredible work with regenerative grazing down in New Mexico and places in the southwest, pardon me. I've added and changed to this, calling this patterns of permanence, and added this idea of context. So holistic context is the idea of what the spoken or unspoken, clarified or unclarified values are of a project. And if we don't know those clarified values of both the client, the regulatory climate, and the inherent characteristics of a landscape, which we're going to talk about, then everything else really doesn't matter, because chances are, and generally, people have a hard time changing their minds. So basically, we go from the top to the bottom as we're designing a site. This is an example where years ago, I had a client come to me. They wanted to take a boreal forest. They wanted to cut down all of the trees to make a garlic farm. And really the big issue, as I explained it to them, is that both the climate and the soil both had created and were created by this boreal forest that had a second regrowth. And to take that out and to put it into garlic would take a lot of energy. So whenever what you want is outside of what the pattern is within the landscape, it takes a lot of energy. So wild crafted forest products totally matches. When you take a look at soil, forests have anywhere from like an 1,000 to 100,000 ratio from fungal to bacterial. So that means for every one bacteria, there's 10,000 to 100,000 fungal in forest ecosystems. When we move to disturbed ecosystems, and garlic's one of these pioneer crops that we've turned into a culinary food crop over years of breeding and selection, that's a 1 to 1, 1 to 1.5. So even the soil itself didn't really want to help support garlic. In the top here in the floral, the ecosystems category, flat open full solar exposure is what you're looking for garlic. In terms of wild-crafted forest products, you want a canopied forest. I start this all the time when I'm doing presentations and when I'm working with clients. So that way they can start to realize that there are rules of the game, so to speak, that we have to observe deeply to understand to then make good decisions in design. So this is called the Practical Permaculture Institute of Kenya. It was the brainchild and the culmination of a life's work of Michael Nichols, who runs Seven Ravens Permaculture Academy and Ecoforest over on Salt Spring Island in British Columbia, Canada. And Michael had been going over to Kenya for years. I think it was 25 years by the time I had started teaching with his 3-month immersive PDC at his farm. And every year he would take over a group of students to Kenya. He would do these school projects. And this year, the year I went, I was invited to go with the students that I'd been teaching for a couple of months. We were going to be developing and designing an institute. The idea being that instead of going to school by school, we could create an institute of permaculture, and the schools could send their representatives and they could learn about the site. So basically, we were in Kenya, very close to the Ugandan border in Butula, Busia. And as the story goes, Michael had been there for a number of years. He would then take funding from donations from the Rotary Club, from private donations, and we would go over and work. And over the years, he started to make connections and meet with school teachers and individuals there. And he met this incredible man by the name of Josephat Barasa, or JB. JB was a school teacher turned permaculture farmer when Michael came years ago. And basically this property, this half-acre property you see behind you, over the span of 16 days, we transformed it into the first Practical Permaculture Institute of Kenya. Now, there are 3 others. There's Zimbabwe, Zanzibar, and Uganda now. And this was the design that we came up with and developed with the students as we were going through. We had about 3 to 5 days of design. And if you feel like it's a little bit of stress to design your sites in the course, I can tell you honestly, designing in 5 days and then installing on day 6 is wild. just wild. This is a colorized version that I gave to Mark Vanderduggen. He was a student of mine. He worked in graphic design. I was great with pencil and paper. So I really want to make this point to everybody who's been frustrated over their maps. This is what I drew. This is what we, after the fact, developed. And then this is the story of how it went. Oh, it was 18 days. Yeah. Okay, so basically half a day 1, we started clearing the material. We put up the upright posts and the beams for the kitchen. By day 2, we started to dig the earthworks. We had put everything into compost piles. Day 3, we started to dig the raised pathway. Kitchen was almost done. By day 4, day 5, we had already started to plant. And in the tropics, it's 4 or 5 days and things start to come back up. You can see the dormitory there in the back is coming together pretty quickly. The borehole about at this point was half dug, 3/4 the way dug. Plantings have already started to take root. So happened very quickly in a really short amount of time. Some of the details here that I wanted to go over, and I'm not sure why this isn't going. Oh, I gotta click it now. Okay, so this is, interesting. Not sure why it's decided to do the same thing over again. Okay, great. So I'm just going to go right to the water features. Here we go. So this was, oh, it's just going by itself now. This was that front pond we were talking about. And that's the chicken wire, and that's the concrete. And then that was about a year later. They sent us a photo. So this is the design of that first pond. We went back in and created a lip. The reason for the lip is you don't want the soil that's been mounted above to fall in. So we created a little lip and then wrapped it up and around. I was down there working on it. I got kicked out by the 2 masons because I wasn't fast enough. But this is a great example. This was the second silt trap. So we had a silt trap over here that was earthen. This is the second one. And then we went into the main volume of water. And then similarly here, we've got the material being constructed and created, which we've already seen. Just going to see if there's anything else in that presentation that's worthwhile. Oh, this is kind of fun. So the value of this at the end of the day was that 216 primary and secondary adult teachers, teacher adult students who completed their 14-day PDC, and about 160 schools where permaculture was introduced with over 200 independent projects. And after 1 year, we had a huge improvement of small scale growers and developing their own projects. So there was a fair bit of value in the process there. Any follow-up questions about that before I jump into the assignments for this week? Okay, you guys are a quiet group. All right, so what we're going to do is going to take a look at the work for week 3. So we're going to take a look at the site and regional challenges. All right, so as you're coming into week 3's work, this is really about assessing the macro and the micro challenges of your site. One of the great things about permaculture is we really take in our exterior surroundings, our influences, our sectors. I worked on a project once for a construction company, and I had to pitch against a conventional landscape. I had decided to pitch a living landscape, a pollinator landscape. It had food. It was for an in situ aging care home. And when I went there, I said, "Do you know how close school kids get to your site?" Because I wouldn't visit it. They're like, "No, we have no idea. Nobody's there. They can't see it." I was like, "Well, snowmen don't move. So if there's a snowman that's 5 feet away, you're probably going to have a lot of kids at this one boundary." There was this conversation about helping them to understand that they lived in a context, which is not very common in common planning and design and construction. So first and foremost, we want you to take a look at the problems and weaknesses. So what do you see as the major problems and weaknesses? And now, after you've gone through a couple of the SWOT analysis, should be able to get a sense of what are the problems or weaknesses of your site. What are the obstacles to resolving those problems? This is very similar to the way that I conduct a good fit call, where I ask people, what's the problem I'm supposed to solve? What's the obstacle they found in solving that problem? What's the cost related to those problems? And then what's their ideal outcome? This is a great way to go through your mental process when looking at a site. Next, what's the cost of the unresolved problems? For a client, this could be frustration. It could be actual cash. It could be lost opportunity. It could be less time spent outside. Take a look at the cultural and social economic challenges and really make sure to think it through. Why is a certain type of social or cultural challenge there, and why is it an issue? Don't just name it, assuming that everybody understands why it's an issue. You really have to support what it is you're saying. And then what are the strengths and opportunities of your site? Then take a look at most likely natural disasters. So take a look and see if you have threat of either cloud bursts, hailstorms, earthquakes, fires, anything under the sun. If there's any type of insect flow or cycling, it's something that we found. And as we get more arid in Canada, we're starting to get a lot of the metamorphosis of grasshoppers to locusts. And it plagued my garden 3 years ago. They ate everything, stem, leaf, you name it. And then what are some of these strategies you can start to think about against these issues? Then in this section, we're going to take a look at the problems. So all the problems you identified, and then what are some site-specific solutions? So you may start to have taken a look at some of the examples. There's tons of content within the course. So this is your place and time to start to really kind of think about what the potential solutions could be. If you need to remove or add some of these rows, please do so. And then as usual, what's the SWOT analysis? This kind of a summation of the entire assignment. What do you see now as the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? And like I said at the beginning, and I say throughout the tutorials, The SWOT analysis is a great way to double check as you go through each one of these lenses. Are there new strengths, new weaknesses, new opportunities, new threats? What are some of those elements within the entire conversation of your site that you can be specific to? And then we finish off this week with the sector compass. So a sector analysis is all of the influences into, on, or through a site. So we'll take a look at some of the common sector analysis, things like water flow. So you'll want to show water flow coming through or water pooling or puddling. You'll also want to show if water flows from one side to the other. Take a look at the fire sector. There may be a specific fire sector to be worried about. Take a look at summer sun, winter sun. We have a whole process of going through and finding your sun analysis, getting a sense of where the sun comes up in the summer and comes up in the winter. For those of you in the southern hemisphere, this will be flipped, so it'll be on the top. And then, oh no. Are we back, everybody?
I'm back.
Okay, sounds good. And then we're going to take a look at solar angle at high noon. So basically we're taking a look at the angle that the sun comes in and then showing that angle of both the summer shadow and then the winter shadow as well. Super useful to see. We've got pollution. So what is the pollution sector here? Wildlife, visitor view, prevailing winds. You may want to split this into the summer and the winter winds so you're really clear on where those winds come in. Summer winds, we usually want to be conscientious about fire. Winter winds, we usually want to be conscientious about deflecting. Generally speaking, wind can take up to 30 to 40% of the biomass of an animal or of a plant, or can remove 30 to 40% of the heat from your house. So you want to be very conscientious to know where that wind's coming from for your design. You'll replace this image with a image of your base map. Usually the grayscale works good and works well. And then you're going to show what are the nearest grocery stores, population center, public space, and label them just so that way it's not just population center. You actually tell us what the center is. It's very simple title bar here. And there's two options. Student actually created this version, which is off to the right. I don't remember who it was. Emmy. Also, if anybody ever wants to look at an amazing portfolio, Emmy was incredible. She was out of Japan and she just did a phenomenal job. You can use this one, or we have a second. This was my original attempt. It's great how students will almost always find a better version because we have so many operations or so many iterations of students coming through the class. And then again, we're taking a look at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So just again, looking at this going, what are the main elements that you're worried about? One thing I missed here is that you're also going to tell us if you're going to use, amplify, or deflect that certain sector. So you're going to let us know if that's going to be something you're going to use, if it's going to be deflected, or if it's going to be amplified. And that's a great example to put into your SWOT analysis. And that's it for lesson 3, week 3's assignments. Any questions about that? Thoughts, queries?
A question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when you were showing the ones with the sun angles and everything like that, I know there's some form of equation you could use in order to get that. I'm currently in Panama, so a lot of places don't have that information really available. Does that thing show you the formula in order to get that properly? I use SumCalc, but I don't think it really helps out in terms of telling you what the angle is.
Yeah, so even better, we've got Sun Earth Tools or the solar data chart. And then I've got a full tutorial. So the website itself, if you put in either your lat, your long, or your UTM, it will give you all of the angles, and all you have to do is then place them onto the map. Good question. Thanks. Anything else? Go for it.
I am just like a small suburban lot. And so I guess I'm really kind of struggling with the more the concepts of like containing the water in a more natural sense. You know, they feel a lot bigger than my smaller scale situation. But also like for the sector compass, I guess I keep falling into, all right, I've got my west facing wall and my east facing wall, and anyway, I'm just trying to like wrap my brain around it in a more like suburban scale.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So starting off with the sector analysis is still applicable to an urban conversation. We're still interested in wind flow, still interested in solar angles. You know, all of that makes sense, especially when you start to think if even in an urban situation, if you're doing a small scale perennial planting, you'll want to make sure that the heights make good sense. So that way you're maximizing all of that solar space. So all the solar angles make really good sense. The second thing that I think a lot of designers of homes forgot is the number one way to prevent your house from heating up is to make sure that the summer sun doesn't hit the walls of your house. And so even understanding the solar angles then gives you the opportunity to say, okay, am I going to extend some of the eaves? Am I going to make some awnings? Am I going to create a bit more shade so that way I can reduce the cooling bill of my house in the summer? Same thing there with water flow. So a lot of urban sites have water flow from poorly designed drainage from either other houses or lots or from their own homes. So sometimes a lot of folks do this. I don't know why this ever became a thing, but the downspouts of a house just end in the corners and they never go away from the house. It just pools around the foundation. So, you know, all of that is what you would be putting into that site. Desirable and undesirable views is a primary driving design feature for urban folks. I don't want to see my neighbors. I'd like to see something else besides them. So that's really important to put sort of to put desirable and undesirable views in there. Pollution as well. So in urban environments, there's lots of noise pollution, light pollution. I've got a video on YouTube called Avberry Hugelculture, where we designed a hugelculture in front of our yard to block out the guy's storm light that was always on 24/7 that came right into my bedroom. So those can be really important design factors and motivating constraints for you to work on. In terms of the water conversation, in an urban site, Bill had this, Bob Mollison, the co-creator of Permaculture, had this great rule of thumb that you would always try to make sure a third of a site was in water. And in urban sites, it's not as easy to do that, but the way we might look at it is there already pre-existing pooling areas that may naturally want to be small water bodies or rain gardens? Is there an opportunity to put in rain barrels? Is there an opportunity to take that water directly from the drain spout and putting it into beds themselves, or putting them into hugelcultures, or putting them into, which is my favorite, swale pathways in urban settings? So you take the downspout, you put it directly into the swale, but you mound the swale up with mulch, and that then becomes a way to actually water the garden beds on either side. Plus, produces soil like nothing else. Those swale trails, they create an incredible amount of soil in a short amount of time. They also produce an incredible array, kind of create like a coral reef for earthworms. So we find quite a bit of earthworms in those trails. And then if you want to double up on this, and if you're in the right climate with the right types of mushrooms and the right types of wood chips, you can inoculate those pathways to produce mushrooms. The Western garden giant, Rusula stropharia annulata, was the one we used. And so the pathways then became production bed. They became a mushroom pathway. I remember having a student being like, well, what happens when they flush? You harvest them. You cut them and you bring them inside and you eat them. They're delicious. So, you know, that type of water inclusion can be useful. Also in urban environments, you can think about either developing raised beds with either hugelculture developed within them, or creating wicking beds that have a water reservoir in the base of them that then wick up into the material, thereby reducing the amount of watering you're doing on a weekly or sometimes monthly basis. Some of these wicking beds can be incredibly valuable. And on my YouTube channel, I've got two excellent interviews, one with Hutchinson Seed Contracting and their development of wicking beds using galvanized horse troughs, and then with very edible gardens, and they're incredible 2 decades of developing wicking beds. So there's all of those sort of like high levels. And then there's the water features, just adding a bird bath, just having a place where birds and bees can stop for a moment and pick up water, especially our native pollinators. There's very little open water bodies in and around our urban environments. The other aspect is if you ever get into the very regulatory gray area of gray water in urban environments, you can develop these little bathtub wetlands that was really well outlined in Art Ludwig's How to Design a Gray Water Oasis. They're exceptional, and sometimes it's just working with like the washing machine, because the washing machine has a pump that can produce about 1 meter and a bit of head height, so it can actually push the water up and out. And that was one thing we did in 2 houses I lived in. We basically retrofitted the washing machine to come up and out into a half rain barrel, and then come out into 3 bathtubs that were wetland to help to cleanse and clean the water, but also to use that water in the landscape. So that way we weren't taking from the irrigation. Then of course there's the rain harvesting. I'll say this for everybody: rain barrels are almost without exception, except for the washing machine, because it was a place to hold it briefly before it went into the bathtubs. Those barrels, those 55-gallon barrels, 250 liters, it's just not enough volume. So if you are going to put in a rain barrel, the minimum I recommend is 1,000 liters, 250 gallons. They're the IBC totes, international something container. But those are kind of the minimum, because you use so much water in a site. And when you design a rainwater harvesting system, you're really trying to take a look at the gap in the rain precipitable values, and you're trying to build your storage over that gap. So for most people, a rain barrel is not enough. If that's all you have and you want to do it to learn the connections and how to use it, great. But just realize it's going to be a drop in the bucket, really.
That's good to know. I know that I think for our like zoning purposes, I think we're capped at 500 gallons in any like if I were to do rain barrels, it would be 500 gallons like total.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would obviously need to have it pour into something else, right? Like, so I know some people have gone around that with a pond or something like that. I don't know that my site can handle a full blown like pond water feature, but like that's something I'm considering in the development. But I that's very good to know about that for sure. Thank you.
Yeah. It's really just being conscientious about your site, and if a water body of some ilk makes good sense for the design criteria. It's not like, never be the permaculturalist who walks down the permaculture store and just grabs stuff off the permaculture shelf and then throws it onto a landscape. That's what we want to avoid. We want to make you articulate your designs around the design needs of the site. But things like rain gardens, where you've got transit time of under 24 hours, where it's a stepped, semi-wet sort of crater garden where you have different plantings at different heights, is a wonderful way to increase the amount of diversity in a landscape, and generally self-waters, especially if you start to do some different types of hugelkultur in there, so that way you have some decomposing mass, so that way it holds water long term.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Great question. Any other questions?
I just like to ask, the sector compass, can you do it on Google Earth Pro as well?
You had a second question. Sorry, sir. Totally skipped over it. Yes, you can. My apologies. Okay, I'm probably gonna go like 5 or 10 minutes over. So for everybody who wants to leave, please do. Fantastic to see everybody. Any questions, comments, queries, feel to reach out. Do not suffer alone for long. If you've gone through all the tutorials and gone through all the material and you're still having problems with something, reach out. Javin@allpointsdesign.ca. We'll jump on a Zoom and we'll figure it out. So just don't suffer long term. There's something about North American society that makes us all want to suffer longer than we need to. So just be conscientious to take the time to work on what's important. I'm just waiting for Google to load up here. Sorry about that, mate. I just I got talking. That's what happened. So I'm going to show you an example, and then I'm going to show you on the profile that I built for, oh, I deleted yours. Never mind. I thought I kept it from last time. All right, so we're going to show
Hey,
you this.
Can you repeat what the question was?
Yeah, so
Sorry.
the question was, how do you create a sector compass on Google Earth Pro? That was the question. And I'm going to show you on a previous client's example. Land analysis, site analysis, zones. I think I'm getting close. Sector. Okay, great. And we're just going to click on one first. Okay. Move that out of the way. Here we go. Great. So this is a half circle. So you can create these circles, and then you can create their size and their shape. And then you can right click, get info, and little tip and trick here. You want to put whatever you put it in the title in this first dialog box. If you don't, you'll lose the ability to hover over and actually have a title, or click on it and have a title come up. So basically what we do here, if I remember correctly, is we go to the ruler function. And I'm on a Mac. If you're on a PC, this might be a little different. You go to circle, and then you click and you create your radius in whatever size and shape you want. Click save. We'll probably want to take it off the ground. You can see it's clamped to ground. I'm going to go to altitude, and we're going to go relative to ground. And we're going to just pull it up a bit so that way it gets off the ground a bit. There we go. And then if we click on it again, and then Command I, we have all these points. So we can take one of these points, mess that up positively. So we can take one of these points. Come here. Do this one more time. All right. Get info. There we go. So we can take one of these points, click on it. Okay, we're going to do this again. Sometimes things do not work. Let's go in here. Add. So we're going to go up to ruler. We're going to grab a circle. I like doing the circle at the same place. There we go. Save. And now that we're in it, okay, I'm going to make a point in the center. And then as I click on these points, I can actually delete them. So if I click the delete button, we basically move it out. And if I grab this one and pull it back, then we have our arc. There's actually two here. I got to delete this one too. Nice. And then we can basically create an arc all the way around. So there we go. So basically you hold here, and then basically you can just delete around to where that arc finishes, and then that becomes your circle. So that becomes a circle you can use for your sector analysis. And then you can go in there and mess around with the dots. But here's a great example. It says circle measurement. We click on it, nothing. So if we click on it again, right click, get info, and say fire sector, then we copy and paste that and put it into the dialog box in the bottom. And if we click on it, it pops right back up. So that's how I do my sector analysis. Does that make sense, Winod?
Yeah, 100%. It makes sense. I am on PC, so I'll see if I struggle. I'll Google, but I'm sure I'll get right from there.
Okay, sounds good. And I think you've set up a meeting with me tomorrow. So if you are having problems, maybe play around with it between now and then. And when we have our chat, if I need to help you correct anything, then we've got the material to do so.
100%. Thanks.
All right, folks. As we wrap up, what are folks taking away from the conversation today? What felt useful?
Well, a lot of things got pointed out to me how to do it, so it was really useful on that front. Thanks. And a lot to think about.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. What else? Small things, big things.
For me, anything dealing with water, because Panama rains quite a bit, and water is going to be one of my biggest challenges to make sure I could capture, store, or repel, depending on the circumstances. So anything dealing with water was extremely helpful.
Absolutely. Awesome. Great. Anybody else want to chime in?
Yeah, a lot of good information, diverse information, a lot of information about water. And I have a question about water for the sector compass. I'm kind of wondering how to represent it on with the arcs. Like there's a lot of challenge with water on my side. I feel I could represent it like the flow and where the water go and where I could store it, but how to figure out how to use the circle, or it seems like there's no good way except a full circle all around the the site, and it's all blue. So where to go?
Yeah.
With,
Yeah.
with,
So if,
with the sector compass and water, yeah, kind of an issue for me there.
yeah. So if anybody has a sector that's a bit more involved, that can't just be explained with a radius of either a compass arc or an arc itself, I'd recommend creating a new sector analysis map and then creating iconography. So if you have an area that generally floods, if you have an area that generally has a huge amount of water inundation that comes in, if you have soggy areas or wet areas, if you have flow, you're basically developing your water flow map early, but it's really useful to communicate to a client or to me or to your classmates that level of specificity. So I'd probably make a new sector. I'd make one sector compass for everything else, and then just say water on next slide. And then there, I would probably make some kind of iconography for wet areas, flooding areas, wetlands, anything under the sun as it comes to water. And then any areas that are perennial flows, any areas that are ephemeral flows, and when. If there's any water flows that are coming off of site, just showing from an arrow perspective, this is water from outside, usually comes in September, it's usually quite large. Just that kind of conversation, so that way you can be more specific if it's going to be useful for your design. Does that help?
Yeah, okay, thanks. I'll figure out, and I guess with the section dedicated to water later on the course, I can relate and see, and maybe in the future how I should look at this issue. Or yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no worries. And maybe what you do is you take a look at it's assignment 11 or 12. 10's the survey. I think 11 is the flow map. Maybe you just want to make your water flow map now and just show as much as you can and then refine it for then. That would be fine too. Yeah. All right, folks. Well, it was a pleasure. Glad to see so many faces. As usual, if you have any questions in between now and our next Zoom hour in 2 weeks, feel free to put it into the question and answer document. Make sure to put your name and your portfolio link, so that way I can reference what you're talking about. I like questions early. It gives me time to think about it. I tend to take a look at the questions on the weekend and then the night before, just to precog a little bit and kind of think about it. If you're having problems, reach out. Happy to help. And besides that, hope you're enjoying the course and having a good time. It's a great course, and try to have a bit of fun with it. I know everybody's here because it's serious work, and the world seems in more dire straits every day than the last. But if you can hold things lightly, and if you can have a bit of fun, and if you can play with it, especially with design, it comes a lot easier. It's coming from experience of taking things too seriously for too long. So with that, pleasure. If anybody wants to unmute and say goodbye, now's a good time. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, goodbye, everyone.